What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me on D's analysis. We're going to be looking at MSTR, Bitcoin, and a couple different charts and indicators. So we have fallen underneath our long-term upward sloping trend line. We had a red engulfing candle to the downside. We fell underneath our upward sloping trend line, and we fell underneath our downward sloping trend line here. And then to start this week off, we still have 3 days and 20 hours, but we have pushed back above. We'll see if this is just a retest for a leg down, or if we can actually make this some kind of V-shaped recovery and maybe get some kind of engulfing candle back up and hopefully back into this upward sloping trend line and resume the trend that we've already seen established for some time. As we all know, we've had multiple bounces off of this key level, so we want to play back inside of this range for sure. So the two scenarios that we spoke of, once we saw the break and hold of this zone, was potentially breaking, holding, retesting, testing this level, seeing if we break, hold, and then that's going to open up the idea of falling further. The other one was having that kind of V-shaped recovery, because we all know that MSTR is volatile and this thing can turn around in the snap of a finger. As long as Bitcoin starts to, go to the upside, because if Bitcoin goes sideways or down, then of course MSTR is going to be doing the same, if not worse. So we're just hoping that MSTR can start to catch up to Bitcoin on the upside and start to outperform instead of slightly outperform or do the same as Bitcoin. Actually, sometimes even underperforming Bitcoin, which is, it kind of defeats the purpose of investing in MSTR. So hopefully we can get this thing ramping back up and we can start talking about these higher targets, like hitting this midline of this trend line and so on, and eventually breaking this level at around 456 to create fresh highs and continue this upward sloping trend line. On the daily, there is a gap right here, so we'll see if we actually come to fill that. We'll see if we fill it. Maybe we break back above, or maybe we find that rejection, because remember, we are playing underneath the key upward sloping trend line. This is probably one of the most powerful levels of resistance and support that we have on this trend line, because it's been established for so long and it's been respected for so long. So the fact that we've actually broken underneath it might take a little bit of power to break back to the upside. Like I said, we could find some rejection, but if we get enough volume, then we could find ourselves closing back above it with no problem. But we definitely need volume if that's gonna happen. On the weekly SMA, you can see we are sitting on our 20 right now. We close slightly underneath it, but now we're playing back above it. So this is acting as a key level of support in confluence with this level right here at the 360 to 359 level. So we have a pretty decent level of support. The strongest level would be this one here at 320 to around 311. And then the other stronger level would be this 447 to around 437 in terms of horizontal levels of support and resistance. And then, of course, the strongest is going to be this upward sloping trend line, because it has the most touches for the longest time. But the SMAs are looking pretty good as it's acting as confluence, like I said. On the daily, we do have to take a look at this 50 and see where we land and how it reacts when we get there, because that's going to be confluence with this upward sloping trend line. So this upward sloping trend line is going to act as resistance along with this 50. So it's confluence to the downside, which could potentially continue the move further down. And if you pull a fib, all of these levels might be in confluence with the 382, which is a key level of a reversal or continuation of price to the downside. So be aware of that. Weekly RSI looks like it's finding a bounce off the 50, the midline here, the neutral zone, and pushing up. We'll see how it reacts once we get to the yellow moving average, if we can overtake it or if it just continues the trend downward. And on the daily, kind of the same concept. We're just a little bit further down. We made it to about 35. And in the last MSTR video, we were talking about that zone of around 35 or so, somewhere in that ballpark there to somewhere in here, like 37 to 32. I forgot exactly where I put the zone, but you get the concept. It was this zone here where we could be finding a reversal on the RSI. For MSTR here on the daily, you can see that we found this level to be a key level for reversals before. So we were speaking of that. And it looks like right now we could be getting that move, but we're not out of the woods yet because this can always continue on down. But this is a key level that we could turn around at. And we talked about that in the last video for the RSI. That's why we're always looking at all these indicators to see if we can spot something that might, give us some kind of a clue as to what's coming up. On the weekly MACD, you can see creating some kind of bull flag. So we'll see if it plays out or if it turns out to be a double top. Those are kind of the two things I could see playing out. Like I said, you have this already M shape kind of forming. We'd have to just break, pretty much we'd have to break the structure here, and you'd see it on the RSI, or on the MACD, I'm sorry. And for the bull flag, it would be, breaking out of this structure here to the upside. So we're kind of stuck in this little range right here. We're pretty much waiting to make some kind of decision because we're still at key levels of, support and resistance, and we have key trend lines in play right now. So it's kind of all jumbled up, and prices kind of just compressed between all of these levels. So it has to make a decision. I don't know when that's going to be, hopefully soon, so we can find out where this thing's going. And to the downside, you can see volume starting to kick up a little bit. The last 2 days have kind of gone sideways and a little more to the bullish side. As you can see, the volume's dwindling down a little bit. We want to see a continuation like so. We want to see that red volume start to decrease and then flip back bullish, and we can start to see some green hills like we've seen over here, so we can get a nice aggressive move to the upside. Bitcoin on the weekly, you can see we did close on the weekly underneath this wick here. So closing underneath that wick is going to increase the likelihood of us retesting off this zone and pushing down further, which we already spoke about. We'll see if it holds true or if it decides to have a V-shaped recovery. And to the upside, if we were to break this wick here and hold above this zone, that's going to be a key level for us to continue to the upside. If we can break back above here, bounce off of here, and then we're going to find some kind of rejection along the way here because we have plenty of wicks in this area. So we probably won't even make it to this trend line. We'd probably chop before making it to the trend line. But you can see there's so much. This is a lot going on in here. So it's kind of something like that to clean it up a little bit. We'd probably find some kind of resistance there. But there's so many wicks, as you can see. So we'd probably reject off of that zone, try and fight through it before we could even make it up to this upward sloping trend line. In terms of global liquidity, you can see we still have some ways to go to the upside. How much? That's the question, but you can see the trend is to the upside here. I don't know exactly where we are in the cycle exactly, but this is a 79-day offset. So you can see global liquidity is still on the rise. And we had a major cool-off period, which would probably be a major correction in Bitcoin. At some point after having some kind of move to the upside, we'd probably see a very large drawdown. And then now it looks like it's back on track, trying to create a fresh level. But when you look at global liquidity, you can also see some kind of trend right here. So we will see what global liquidity does when it starts to push back up to this trend line. We'll see if it actually can break it and we break, retest, and push higher, or if we end up pushing up to that level here and find some kind of rejection, and then this liquidity cycle is kind of over and maybe this is our top. Of course, I think we're more than likely going to break out of this and continue higher and break these highs over here. But of course, I can always be wrong. Nobody knows what's going to happen. MSTR divided by Bitcoin. So we had this upward sloping trend line that we've kind of were respecting. And then we talked about the possibility of this potentially being a bear flag. And a measured move would be, from this top over here. Where would it be exactly? Let me try and zoom in so I can be more accurate. It would be a little bit lower, so right around there. And we almost got that. Nothing's exact, but you can see the move ideally was calling for a 18.9% drop, and we ended up getting a 16.6% drop. And who knows, it could still continue on down, but this was pretty accurate for the most part. Calling for an 18.9% drop and getting a 16.6, that's a pretty solid call in my opinion. But yeah, that ended up playing out, the bear flag. And yeah, it looks like MSTR was going to underperform just because of this leg with this right up here, which also probably lines up with like the 0.5 to the 618. It looks like about half of the move. Yep. So you can see there 0.618 to 0.5. You can see that retracement. That's a magnet for price. And you can always see those half move retracements always play out. Not always, but a lot of the times. So that's a continuation to the downside. And once you make it to the 0.5 of the 618, that's going to indicate more than likely that you would continue this trend downward. And that's exactly what happened. And that's how we got our bear flag to play out. So that in confluence with the break of a trend line with the bear flag, that's a lot of indication for lower prices. And that's why we were talking about it. You're not really going to ever see me call something definite, but that's why I give you both scenarios, just so you can see the whole picture, because you don't want to just be always bullish on something or always bearish. You want to have both ideas. Okay, I can see in this scenario why it would be bullish if we do this, and if we do this, then I can see it being bearish. That's the thing with charting. People don't understand. They want it to be black and white, but it's really a bunch of if-then statements. If this happens, then this is more likely to happen. If this happens, then this is more likely to happen. On the weekly SMA, that's the other thing too, which could be supporting this trend down even more, is this 50, the 50-week SMA. So we have fallen underneath that. And remember, when we fall underneath these structures, we tend to retest them. So I'm not saying that this is just a retest, but you have to take that into consideration. I absolutely hope this is a V-shaped recovery, and we use this 50 as support to push us up higher. But we also have to think about what typically happens. Once you get a solid close down, you don't just keep going down forever. You tend to retest what you just broke and potentially continue that move down. So be mindful of that. And then we could also pull a fib on this one and start to talk about, so if this was our theoretical bottom, like for instance, this is the bottom, we need to break this 0.5 to 618 and use this as support. Because if not, this is going to be a key zone where we could find a reversal of this uptrend and a continuation of this bearish move to the downside. Exactly what happened over here. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but you need to be mindful of all of these levels. And that's why I make these videos for you guys. I look at the charts so you don't have to. Here on the daily, we have a crossing of pretty much all of the trend lines, honestly. The 20 and the 50 are breaking underneath the 200, which is incredibly bearish. But like I said, they're always lagging indicators, so you have to take it with a grain of salt. But that's typically a pretty bearish sign for MSTR divided by IBIT. And if that were to happen, then that's just showing that MSTR could potentially underperform Bitcoin. And now that's gonna, start to throw out the ideas after seeing this, downturn and a continued, downward sloping trend line from these peaks. We're gonna start hearing more of the double top ideas, which we saw in 21. So we'll see if that plays out again, or if it goes well and we start to reclaim this and continue higher. But we're definitely going to be hearing about that a lot more. And also something I would also be looking at too is a potential, this is very early so we don't know, but maybe a inverse head and shoulders, which would be incredibly bullish. Maybe this is a left shoulder, maybe the head is being formed now, maybe we push down to the complete measured move, we find some kind of like support off of this level, we bounce off of here, and we create that right shoulder for a measured move. Maybe it's like over here or something, but you get the idea. And a measured move higher. So that would be the incredibly bullish scenario. Of course, we need Bitcoin to rally, but we also need MSTR to outperform Bitcoin in stop underperforming and perform how you know we all anticipated it to do. We're expecting some kind of aggressive move. It doesn't have to be exactly like these moves, but that's what we're all in it for. We're not expecting something like this. We're expecting something aggressive like that to the upside, where this thing is completely outperforming Bitcoin by a long shot. You can see that outperforming by 150%, outperforming by 150%, and then when we take it from this low here, outperforming by 45%. That's not what we're here for. We're here for larger moves. That's why we're taking on additional risk for the additional upside. On to tether dominance. Now this thing is starting to look a little more bullish. We want to get this weekly close back underneath this level because now we closed on the weekly back above here. So now that we close here, this is going to increase the likelihood of us bouncing for an uptrend. So a move to the upside could potentially start to create some kind of downturn for Bitcoin if we move up higher. Now, if we were to fall back through, close, retest, and push on down, then that's going to be awesome, and that's going to be great for Bitcoin. Now, on a fib level, for this leg here, we are actually at the 382, which is a very good sign because that's a continuation to the downside. But we also have to be mindful that the 0.5 to the 618 is the magnet. So we could make it all the way up here, which would be, short-term downturn for Bitcoin before seeing some kind of retracement to the downside. So be mindful of that. That's pretty much all I have for you guys. Make sure you drop a like and subscribe on this video. It always helps, and I appreciate your support. I'll see you guys in the next one.